back. I'm Claire Cousins from Textiles East Fair. It's lovely to see you again and I hope you're all well. This particular video is going to be about me using some more of my lovely yumminess of scraps. I have a whole collection of bits and bobs and this time I'm making these, I'm going to call them toadstools, the magical toadstools. As yet I have got to finish them. I want to mount them on a block of wood and create a mossy little dell for them. So I hope you enjoy the video showing you how I made this particular one. So come and have a look at my desk and see what I'm up to. So here on my desk I have been making these quite dramatic fantasy mushrooms. It's just recent, it's over here in the UK, it's winter time, but this last couple of months the garden has been absolutely full of fungi because it's just the right conditions for them, and it's inspired me to make my own fabric versions of them, but in a very quirky way. And so I've used up some of my scrapped hand-dyed fabrics. These two are quite small. I've done one, the next one I'm doing is a little bit bigger because I'd like to have a bigger one here. I'm going to put them on a wooden plinth, I think. I haven't finished. It's like everything I do. I create and then I put things together at the end as and when it looks, just as and when it looks nice. So it does need a third one. And this time I've gone for, it's velvet. This is a velvet that I've hand dyed myself. Though at the Textiles East Fair, I know Sandra Beach, she often has her hand-dyed velvet, so I know she'll be there, and I'm sure there'll be other people with hand-dyed velvets as well that you can pick up. So it's worth having a look at some of the stalls. I've also got, this one was my own hand-dyed doily, but on this one and on this one I've got a piece of hand-dyed doily. It's just an offcut of a tablecloth that Melanie Misson has dyed up, so she'll be at the fair, so no doubt you'll be to pick up some of her lovely sort of inspiration. I won't call them scrap packs because they might look like scraps to some people, but to me they're little gems, little packs of gem that could be created into such amazing, well, I think they're amazing. Some people might not agree with me, but I love these fantasy mushrooms. So they are made out of scrap bits of material. You don't have to have anything amazingly new or anything, but as I say, if you want to get the hand-dyed stuff, then definitely the Textile East Fair is the best place to come and pick some up. So already then I've cut my top. Let me explain how I go about it. So first things first, I cut the underside base it's all going to be attached to, and you can see that I have just cut lots of slits in the middle to form the bit where the stalk comes through. And all this is, it's just a cereal box, you know, it doesn't have to be anything amazing. So again, recycling. I've also got my recycled trimmets off my quilt. So every time I do a quilt, all the little waste bits that come off, I can break this down and create my own stuffing from it. So don't throw your quilt trimmings away, because even your quilt trimmings, the wadding part of it, well, I say wadding, batting for some people, you can break it down and it makes really good fibre fill to fill it. So I've got that as well. I've also got here my stalks. I've chosen to use, we call it here muslin, some people call it cheesecloth. It's basically quite a coarse woven material. I've chosen that because I quite like that texture for the stalk. Now the bit underneath, I think they're called fins of the mushroom, I've chosen to use silk because you can get a really nice pleated effect. Now what I've done, the way I've cut it, it doesn't matter what size this disc is. I mean, I don't know, that looks to me like the lid of a jar or a coffee mug you've put down, and I've just drawn around it. It's not, I just hand cut out a circle. So just give you this sense of size, it basically is drawing around a lid of a jar or a glass or something. And then to work out the silk part of it, all you do is you make sure that the width of it goes from at least from the centre to the outside with an extra 1.5 centimetres or so, and that's to allow for stitching and gathering and the piece that goes through the hole, because you'll understand later. Now the length of it, it's quite a long strip, is actually double the circumference. So what you can do is get a tape measure, measure that circumference, and then whatever that is, so that was, I don't know, I don't even know what it was, it might have been about 10 or 15, then you make sure that this is twice the length. And what you can do for ease of checking is just double up your fabric and wrap it round, and you can see it's just about fits this piece. I didn't measure it, I guessed it. So don't worry about accuracy, I'm just giving you some tips on to how you can roughly work it out. Now the stalk, I decided that I wanted the stalk to be longer than this one. So again, you can measure that. Again, I just guessed it by eye. I thought, well, I wanted it longer. That is longer. And the width of it, I've just gone, well, that looks like that might be okay by the time I've sewn it down. Again, I'm just visualising it, but you can see it's probably, what, I don't know, looks to be about 6 centimetres by 10, just as a rough guess, 6 by 12. As I say, they're your mushrooms. You make them as tall or as fat. The wider you do it, the fatter your stalk will be. The thinner you do it, the thinner your stalk will be. You know, the longer you do it, the longer your stalk will be. So it's down to you. You can create the sort of mushroom you like. I'm just giving you rough, very rough measurement ideas. And then I've just got another scrap of muslin, which has been really roughly cut out, because, and I'm going to stretch all that and spread that all out, because I want to just get the feeling of grasses and mosses and just that lovely lush sort of under foliage and the way the mushrooms grow. So, and what I might also do to this is come back in and give it a bit of dye, or you can even a bit of fabric paint, go in there. Intense inks, you can add some intense inks to it. And, if you're not sure what intense inks are, just go into my playlist or go into my video list and you'll see intense inks. I talk about them quite extensively in some of the videos, but you can see I can just pleat that down roughly where I want it to go. If you want to pin it, and then we can stitch that down with some straight stitch to suggest grass, scatter some beads in it, and that's the stalk. And you'll see on here, I've also done, I've done a stalk with some lazy daisies coming down it, but you could do anything from like a feather stitch, anything to decorate the stalk. And you can see I've also put beads on there. So I'm going to crack on with the stalk, and I'll show you how I'm getting on. Now the tip I can get, I've got a variegated thread here. It's a shame I can no longer get hold of this thread. It is a form of rayon with a metallic thread through every strand, and it was a 6-stranded thread. I used to buy it from a company in London, but I can't seem to find it anymore. It's disappeared, so it's a shame. But if you do end up getting a variegated thread, I would recommend a form of stem stitch, because then the variegation travels down with it. Right, I'm going to start off though with my lazy daisy. That's my first leaf at the top. That's where I want the first leaf to go. I've gone for the middle. Might as well start somewhere. And then what I mean by a slip stitch, the stem stitch, is you just you kind of go in the opposite direction to where you're going. So if you're right-handed, obviously it's going to be this way. If you're left-handed, you have to do it the opposite direction. But you kind of go back on yourself. So you just pick up a little tiny stitch going back on yourself. And then you come forward. And it sort of, it just prevents, I mean, you could do a back stitch. and I'm not a big fan of backstitch. But I do like this one. So I say, if you're concerned about your variegation losing its sort of ombre effect, shall we say, then try this technique. Now you can see I've just pinned this muslin in this area, so I'm hoping just to catch this in here like this. I could have started at the bottom and worked my way up. Well, you can start where you like, and I could carry on through. I think I'll stop there, like that, and then I can add some lazy daisies, so just coming up, going back in, coming out as far as you want your leaf to be, really. I'd like mine quite delicate, so I'm not going to come out too far, and back down. And I'm going to the other side of the stalk, so coming up like that. And just keep doing that all the way up. I might zoom in a little bit more for you. So coming out, catching that leaf on the outside. You could go back and fill the leaves in if you like. I'm not going to, but it's your piece of work if you're inspired by this to give it a go. And as I say, all I'm doing is giving you the ideas. Now you did notice I hadn't drawn my lines on, I just randomly stitched my stalk. However, if you don't feel comfortable with doing that, then feel free to use whatever pen you mark your work with, whether it be a heat erasable pen or air. There's so many pens out there now, isn't there? Chalk. But make sure it's a pen that will disappear, because you don't want to be, if you don't quite stitch where you want to be, then you want the lines to disappear. And you can see how that's slowly building up. Now the variegation, now you can see, is changing. It's this on my one, it's become quite light. Now I choose not to use a frame, but if you're used to using a frame, then please do. It's I think that's personal taste. Obviously if you're using a frame, you'll have to prop stitch this onto a bit of scrap material to fit the frame, and then have to cut it out. So you just consider that if you are using a frame. And there we go. As I say, you don't have to use this stitch. If you prefer like the feather stitch, use a feather stitch. You can add beads to it and do all sorts to it. So I'm going to carry on stitching, and I'm going to sort of overlap them as well. So let me just show you, if I show you this one, and then you'll see, oh, let's bring it in, there we go. You can see I've changed the thickness of threads. This is a different thread. This is that variegated I've just been sewing with. But you can see some overlap, some don't. So it's quite nice where they do. And if I was you, I'd get as close to that seam as you can. Let me just show you this one. Get as close to this seam as you can, because in this case you can see I've got a bit of a gap. I probably could have done with another stalk. I could sew another stalk over the top of that even after it's finished, I suppose. But again, you can see where they've crossed over. So you just curve them in all different directions. and I'll come back and show you how I'm getting on. To do the underfin part, the section here, I'm going to get my piece of silk that I've sort of roughly cut to the length I want it to be, and then I'm going to do a running stitch on the top and a running stitch on the bottom. I mean, if you wanted to get really beautiful, perfect pleats, you could spend hours just ironing it, but that's not me. That's not what I enjoy doing. So first things first, I mean, on a sewing machine you can do it, or you can do it by hand. Just sew the two ends together. And it's just a simple running stitch. It's a knot in the beginning, and you just do a simple running stitch. It's not difficult. Or as I say, you can just whiz it on your sewing machine. It's up to you which you prefer. So I'm just going to sew that end closed, and then I'll show you the next step. I've done a running stitch down there, and then I also then ran all the way back again in between, filling in the gaps. So that should give me quite a nice seam. Now I've chosen not to iron my fabric. You can if you want to iron it. Again, I kind of feel sometimes these random creases gives it more of a naturally feel. Personal taste, I think. I'm going to put another knot in the end here, and then I'm going to do another running stitch on the edges. So I'm going to do it all the way around on this edge, just basic in and out running stitch, and I'm going to do the same on the other edge too. Okay, I'll come back because I think you'll find this, me just doing this, a little bit boring. So I'll show you once I've done both bits. Okay, so what I've done so far then is I've gathered around one edge, and I've gathered around the other edge, and you'll notice that I've slowly started to pull these edges in. So if I pull that a bit more, that will be the centre. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the piece of card inside like that, and I'm going to gently tug these now. Now this gathering, I've done it by hand, but there's no reason why you can't gather it on your sewing machine. I'm pulling both ends because I can tie them off. Now I don't want to put it too tight because I want that really to be more on the edge. The one I do want to pull a bit tighter is the one in the centre, and I'm going to actually push it through because I want it through that hole. I'm pushing it through, and you'll see, there we go, up through the gap. Now I don't want to pull this too tight. What I'm doing is I'm just making sure my finger fits into it, and then I'm loosening it off a little bit. And the reason for that is I want to be able to get the stalk up through the middle. You can see here it's not gathering brilliantly, so you can just gently ease it and pull it and tug it and get it to how you want around the outside edge. And this is why sometimes it's quite nice to keep the creases in if it is a bit creasy, because it adds to the textures. And then once you're happy with that internal piece, you can see I'm just spraying it out like that because I'm going to stitch it in a minute. Just tighten this up a bit more on the outside, grabbing the knot from one end so that I can tie it. Now depending on how tight you pull this will affect how it looks on the opposite side, so do have a look and keep examining it and checking it to see if you're happy with it, and when you are happy with it, tie it off, or when you're nearly happy with it, tie it off, because you can always tug it and pull it. So I've tied that off now, so that shouldn't move too much, making sure it's still can still get my finger in there. I'm just tightening that up a little bit. Happy with that. And yeah, so you can see how that's done. As I say, you can keep pulling it and tweaking it and getting this as smooth and as even as you want to, depending on the effect you want to create. You can even iron it if you want to. As I mentioned before, you can spend the time pleating it and iron it. But I'm happy with just doing that. As I say, that's where the stalk will go in. Now what you can do is you can sew through, but I would wait until your stalk's there, because then what you could do is pick up this edge, sew through your stalk and then come through to the side. So that's as far as I can get with that until the stalk's done. So I'll put that to one side. Let me come back to this now. So this here, I'm going to arrange bits where I want them to go. You can add what you like. These are just bits of scrap velvets, like I had little bits left over like this that I've trimmed. You can see I've trimmed out a circle for this one. Pop them on there. So nothing's really, not even the smallest pieces are wasted because they make nice little dots. And these you could just sew on with a basic little running stitch. You could do a blanket, like a blanket stitch around it. I'm going to just do like pin stitching, so it's like invisible stitching on here. What I might do is grab a pin, pin that on because it's a little bit loose. It doesn't shift about a bit. The problem with velvet, sewing on velvet, is it does have a habit of shifting about when you're sewing. Now this again, I'm doing this all by hand because I'm choosing to, but there's no reason why you couldn't use your sewing machine and stitch things on, or if you don't have a sewing machine and don't like hand stitching, but you could glue gun, to be honest with you, glue gun these on. There's lots of things you can do as an alternative method. I don't want this too close to the edge. If you have a look, I mean that's quite nice there, isn't it? So I might come in a fraction to there. So I'm going to go through, it's gone through. So there's that one there. Now what I like, it's entirely up to you, I like to group things in a 3, so that's my group of 3 there. If you look at this, if I bring this one in, I've grouped these larger sequins in a 3, and then I've scattered 3 others around. I've chosen to have a patch that isn't covered at all, because it kind of looks, I don't know, looks more organic if you get bits that aren't covered. So you can see it's sequins and then beads and sequins. So I'm going to show you how I pin stitch first. So I mean, I've gone for this thread, which doesn't really particularly hide brilliantly, but when you pin stitch it's not so bad. This is when you need, this is my embroidery needle. It's a bit too thick, so ideally you want to change to a thinner needle when you're sewing velvet. This is a very tiny needle. It's just a regular hand sewing needle, I think, but it's tiny. So what I might do is pin stitch on the edge first, so it doesn't shift away from the edge. So what it is you come up and then you go down really close to where you've just come up, but not so close that you go down the same hole. That won't hold. And it does a little tiny pin prick. Come up so you can see. So I'm coming up, going back down, and you can barely see it. I've done it in a paler pink, so you can actually probably see it. But if you were to match your colour thread properly, you wouldn't see this stitch at all. So that's how I'm sewing this sort of doily lace on. So I'll finish stitching that on and then I'll come back. I'm about to sew on the velvet here. Now I have noticed that my velvet doesn't fray that bad. Some velvets I've had before frayed like bilio, but this doesn't too bad. So I've got an orange thread and I'm still doing like a pinprick stitch, but I'm actually doing it just over the edge to try and, I mean that has started to fray, let me just take a bit out and dropping back down. So I'm going to do a tiny little stitch all the way around that edge, and it might be that I go round, oh, got it caught on the other one. It might be that I go all the way round and even go round again. So I might go around several times over that little edge, turning it as I go. So you'll see little tiny, I don't know if you can see, little tiny stitches on the back, and that also I'll go do that all the way around. And then where the velvet, if the velvet does start to fray, you just finish rubbing that off. So it's almost like a little satin stitch all the way around the outside edge. Again, you can free motion embroider that if you like. If you know how to use your flower foot on your sewing machine, that would be nice, wouldn't it? A flower design on that. But that's more advanced skill. So those of you who use the sewing machines and are used to your flower foot, then yeah, give it a go. I've done quite a bit to this since I last showed you. I had started the embroidery on this. I finished the embroidery. I say that, I've got a little bit more to show you here. This is the top part, and I started to show you how I was sewing these patches on, how I oversewed them with like a satiny stitch by hand, or you can do it on a machine as I mentioned. I've stitched these all on. You can see now I've started to stitch the sequins on. Now these sequins are just sequins I've picked up over the years from various places, so unfortunately I can't advise, but I'm sure your local craft shop has sequins. I'm just selecting. What I tend to do, I tend to pour them out into the lid of an old chocolate box, so I can have a good old rummage through them. I had a really nice sequin here a minute ago, it's disappeared. Go for that one. I have a beading needle on because I'm using very tiny beads as well. Now I would recommend a beading mat of felt or a piece of felt when you're using beads, but again I've kept it all in the chocolate tray because I know what's going to happen. I should just lose them. And I'm just going, so I'm sewing for the sequin, sewing for the bead, going back down and then moving to the next place. And I'm changing the size of beads to make it more interesting. Even changing colour of them. There's like a yellowy, orangey one. No, I don't like that one. I think I might need to tip out some more. So I've picked up the bead and the sequin at the same time. So sequin first, then the bead, and then it's the bead that holds the sequin in place. Sometimes I'll just put the bead in. I've got another one of these sequins I got from Melly Maid, and I believe she picked them up from India. I might pop that one there. Now these are unusual in so much as the holes are each side of this sequin. making sure those threads are evenly spread. And then every now and again, I've just done 3, I will just quickly knot it on the back. So every now and again I just do a quick knot. And that stops or reduces sort of puckering if you don't want a puckering effect. Okay, I might scatter a few more beads in amongst that lot before I finish it. So coming back to this, I've left a little bit to show you that at the bottom here I've done some long straight stitches just to secure them. We call it butter muslin, some people call it scrim, cheesecloth, it depends on where you are, what you call it. I might zoom in a bit more for you because I'm just doing French knots. So brought it up, I'm wrapping it 1, 2, 3, and I'm just taking it straight back down. I'm not pulling it too tight, I want quite loose, messy knots. So coming up, 1, 2, 3, back down. See, that's quite messy when you don't hold it. It comes up messy. If you want them neat, then when you come up and go 1, 2, 3, don't let go. Do not let go here. This hand, hold it tight, and then can you see I'm still holding it? There's tension there. If I let go of it, that's when you get the messy ones. So you have to think about whether you want messy ones or not. I actually do want messy ones because I want the texture. So don't pull it as tight and you get the lovely textures. It's quite nice to have a mix of tight and a mix of texture. Again, that adds to the depth. I might get one more out of this piece of thread. There we go. That's the French knots. Finish that off. Okay. Now, I'm going to fold that in half and I'm going to sew down here. Now, if I just sew straight, it would just be like a cylinder. If I want it to be tapering into the point, I can actually come up and then start to curve it. If I want it, but if I do it on one side, it actually makes the toadstool look like it's leaning, which is what I quite like. If you want the toadstool to be more upright, you could also put in a little dart on this side, so you've got more like an even cone. But I actually do like the look of, if I show you this one, I do like the look of the curve. So I'm going to do that again with this one. And you can either use a sewing machine, or in my case I'm just going to do it by hand. And I'm just going to do a simple running stitch along there. Now I've noticed there's quite a lot of fraying there, so I've got to be careful. So I'm going to sew it and then trim it up. And while I say that, I don't need to trim it because it's just going to add to the stuffing. And it's a simple, small running stitch. What I might do is do the running stitch one way and then run all the way back again. That sort of reinforces it. Some people like to do back stitch. Do whatever stitch you like, whatever works for you. You'll notice that now I'm gently turning in, so I've actually got more waste on that edge now to get that shaping that I like. So when you do your embroidery, think about if your mushroom is tapered and how that affects the embroidery. Unfortunately, because I've used a matching thread, you can't see where I've gone, but if I just show you, I've gone down here, gone in, started to taper in, and I've come in a bit there. And I'm just going to work my way back. The reason why I work my way back is I find that I can just get like a smaller stitch effect because I'm actually sewing in the gaps now, and it gives it a stronger seam. I'm going to stuff it, you see, and this is, you've got to remember, this is quite an open weave fabric. I don't want the seam to burst, especially when I've got quite a bit of fraying going on. So I'm just going to knot this end off. Now I could turn it through at this point, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the running stitch around the base, so the wider end, and that's to draw it up. I think I might keep double thickness thread for this. Now you could think to yourself, well, why are you doing that now? Because surely you should pull through the widest edge. What I have found is if I gathered it up later, the gathering didn't pull on the inside. It basically, the raw edge didn't hide. So I have discovered, unfortunately, I have to pull through the narrow neck. Not ideal, but not easy to stuff either. But I found that did give me the best effect. So you can do it the way you want, though. If you don't like my method, it's up to you what you do. So I'm gathering up the bottom like that, grabbing the knot that I started with, and I can tie those two ends together now. Nice and tight. And because it's double thread, it should take quite a lot. Now I'm going to pull it through. Now, as I just mentioned, this is the toughest bit because you haven't got to pull through the very narrow neck, but it does work, unfortunately. I should have said that when I was sewing that seam, it was right sides together. Which is why I'm now pulling it through. And there we go. And you can see now that's like a nice little neat belly button, where if I gathered it now, it would be protruding. So there you go. So then I mentioned using my old batting trimmings from my quilting, and all I'm doing is I'm just breaking it up into little bits and then poking it in the neck of my mushroom. Now you could use a chopstick or a special stick for stuffing. I've just got my scissors, so if you're going to use scissors like I am, make sure they're not too pointy and sharp to break through. I'm going to continue stuffing and I'll show you what it looks like in a bit. Right, okay, I've finished stuffing now. Well, I've finished stuffing to the point that it's quite firm. I'm quite happy with that. I could still, if I want to, I'm thinking I might mount this onto a block of wood with textured surfaces. We'll see. As I say, it's still developing. So you can, there's a hole big enough to really push like a cocktail stick up there to attach it to a base, I think. Anyway, I've left the neck here open. I'm still stuffing it. It's now ready to go into like this part, the thin part underneath. So I'm pushing it up through the opening, and I'm going to open it back up because if I want to, I can still put some more stuffing in there. What I will need to do though is secure that in there. I don't want it to get pulled out. So I'm going to sew it all the way around now. I'll show you what I mean. Got some thread. Right, so I'm going to sew the stalk there on the inside. Then I'm going to go to the outside and grab some of that. And I'm going to just keep rotating. So I'm going to grab the stalk and I'm going to grab the outside. And I'm just going to keep doing that. So I'm grabbing the stalk and I'm going through to the silk underneath as well. So I'm sewing through both layers there. And I'm just going to go back to the outside. And it's doing two things. It's securing stalk to the fin underneath. So it's sewing around here, securing it here. But it's also keeping this part of the fin on the card. You do need quite a good sturdy needle for this. And then you can see that already, you can't see the stitching there, it's securely, I'm pulling it quite tough. So I'm just going to finish sewing that, then I'll show you the next stage. Right, I've stitched it all on, it's all nice and firm now. I can now push that in a bit more, and I can put some more wadding in there, and that helps with not going all floppy around the neck. So it does help with keeping it nice and upright and firm. So you can see how that looks now. Now we're going to pop that over the top there. It's my next stage. Right, the next stage, as I say, is to attach the dome part now. So I've got a thread, a matching colour thread, and I'm coming up and I'm doing sort of like a pinprick at the top and a larger stitch underneath. And I'm just doing this so I can gather it. So it's large underneath and a sort of a smaller stitch on the top so it doesn't show too much. I'm doing that all the way around. So small stitch on the top, bigger underneath, and I'm just doing a simple running stitch, and that's ready for gathering. Now this is a silk velvet, this pink. The others were cotton velvet and they didn't fray at all. This is fraying, so if you're going to use a silk velvet, please be aware. I do have a habit of fraying a lot more. Now this is going to be a raw edge technique of me sewing it on, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. I'm using a good strong polyester thread by Moon. And you'll see, look, it will very slowly start to form that little cap. It's a bit trickier around the lace, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. So I'm just gathering it a little bit at a time as I'm going. Right, I've got all the way round, and I can just position that in there to see that that's going to work okay. What I'm going to do now is add some more of my waste wadding from my quilt, or batting. Just lay that in. Now we don't fill it up completely at this stage. You can put a lot in, put the majority of it in, but you can always top it up afterwards a bit more as it gets sewn on. A little bit more in the middle, and I think I might be there. Yeah. I'm going to fit this in now. And you can see that it's going to be just perfect. Actually, I gathered that just right. Like that. And I can pull it a little bit tighter if I want. I think that's going to be okay. And then all I'm going to do now is just like a slip stitch to hold it on. What I might do is just knot that gather here. So I've grabbed the knot, I'm just tying the two ends together, just knotting it. I think I'm happy with that. So the next stage is to come in, grab the edge of the silk, don't know if you can see that, and then sew back out again. So this is a fiddly stage, because what I'm doing is I'm going from the silk and then I'm catching, I don't know if you can see that, catching the very edge of that silk. Just show you, just there, look. So I'm catching it, coming back out to the edge of the velvet, coming back through the velvet, and then catching that silk edge, like that. And I'll do that all the way around and I'll come back and show you. Right, I've stitched all the way around here, and I've left about a third of it still open, and that allows me to put more wadding in. It does need a bit more, so I should do that. And pop that back over, and so that's shut now. Might need to use your scissors to poke that back in and bring that back out. and I'm just slowly slip stitching this area closed now. So I'm catching here and then catching through the silk, catching the velvet and then catching through the silk. I don't know if you can see that, through the velvet and catching through the silk, and I'm doing that to close the gap. Okay, I'm going to do the little sort of ruffle underneath now. I've decided to go with, I've got some little strips of this stuff, and I've got some little strips which I've just sort of laid over here, and lay this one up, and this is going to be for the bigger one. I'm just going to have this little tiny bit here to go around this one. So the way to do it is to work it out by 2/3. So this is, I want to be sewing along this line, and then that will come down over the top of that and form a ruffle. That's my plan. So I want to see if that works. So I'm just going to do a running stitch on the top here. I could always trim it up if it looks too big. I'm just doing a basic running stitch. So this is like either like a net or an organza or something of that sort of weight. And you can see how that will look on there. I think I will have to trim this top one. This is a bit long. But I'm going to keep going. Unless it goes that way, let's have a look, see. Keep playing with it. Now I've got all the way round. What I can do now is place that in there like that. Grab the knot from the beginning. There it is. And tie these two ends together. Now ideally, I want that to be up. You place it wherever you like on the stalk. It depends how you want your mushroom to look. These aren't botanically correct. So just tighten that up. Now what I can now do is rearrange this ruffle, spread it out and organise it how I want it to look, and then trim it up as well. I think it does need trimming, it's a bit big. It's a very big ruffle. Cut my threads. So shape it and trim it. I might snip into it to give it a texture. We'll see. And I'll repeat with the other one and show you them when they're all finished. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then please don't forget to give me a thumbs up, share, and I would recommend actually just clicking that bell just to remind you when the next video is coming out. So you'll need to subscribe for that, but it's free, so why not join me? Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye bye for now.